opened, a familiarity born of years rather than months. When Alexander stepped inside, he looked less like the titan of industry the world saw on magazine covers, and more like a man carrying the weight of the sky on his shoulders. His tie was loosened, his shoulders slumped, but the moment his eyes found hers, the exhaustion seemed to recede, replaced by a softness reserved only for this room. "You're still awake," Alexander said, his voice rough with fatigue as he walked toward her. He didn't go to the bar to pour a drink as he usually did. Instead, he sank onto the cushion beside her, the leather of his shoes creaking softly. "I was waiting for you," Elena replied, reaching out to touch his cheek. Her hand was warm, a stark contrast to the cold rain outside. The meeting ran late again. Alexander leaned into her touch, closing his eyes for a brief moment. The board meeting. It's never just about numbers, Elena. It's about legacy. They look at me, and they don't see the CEO. They see the end of a line. He opened his eyes, looking at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. They ask about the future. They ask about an heir. The air in the room shifted. The word hung between them, heavy and unspoken until now. Elena withdrew her hand slightly, not out of rejection, but out of an instinctive protectiveness over her own heart. She had heard the whispers at galas, the polite inquiries from his mother, the subtle suggestions from his business partners that a family man was a stable man. She knew Alexander loved her. She felt it in the way he remembered how she took her coffee, in the way he held her hand when they walked through the park, in the quiet mornings when he watched her sleep. But love, she was learning, sometimes struggled against the weight of expectation. "Alexander," she said softly, her voice trembling just enough to betray her anxiety. "We have talked about this. We have tried. My worth. It isn't defined by whether I can give you a son or a daughter." "I know," he said quickly, taking her hand in both of his. His grip was tight, desperate. "I know that. You are everything to me. This company, this empire, it's cold without you. But my father built this from nothing. He expected me to expand it, to secure it. And now, the shareholders are getting restless. They see a single man at the helm as a risk." Elena looked down at their joined hands. She saw the gold band on her finger, a symbol of a promise made in better times. "So, what are you saying, that I am a risk?" "No," Alexander snapped too quickly, then softened his tone. "No, never. You are my sanctuary. But the world outside these walls, it is a machine, Elena. It grinds down anything that doesn't fit its mold. I'm trying to protect us. I'm trying to protect you from their scrutiny. But by bringing their scrutiny into our home, you are letting them win," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. She didn't want to fight. She wanted to comfort him, but she felt herself becoming the problem in his narrative. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the blurred lights of the city. Each light represented a life, a story. Somewhere out there, people were struggling with much less. Yet here, in this tower of glass and gold, they were suffocating under the pressure of perfection. Alexander stood behind her, not touching her, respecting the space she needed. He watched her reflection in the glass. She looked fragile, yet there was a steel in her spine that he admired more than anything. He remembered the day they met, before the billions, before the fame. She had laughed at a joke he made when he was nobody. Now he was everybody, but he felt like nobody without her smile. "I don't want to lose you," Alexander confessed, his voice barely audible over the rain. "But I feel like I am failing everyone. My father, the company, and maybe you." Elena turned around, her eyes glistening. "You cannot fail me, Alexander. Unless you stop seeing me as your wife and start seeing me as a vessel for your legacy. That is the only way you lose me." The silence that followed was profound. It was the kind of silence that precedes a storm, where the air is still and heavy. Alexander wanted to pull her into his arms and promise that nothing mattered but them. He wanted to tell the board to go to hell. But the phone in his pocket buzzed, a vibration that felt like a shockwave against his hip. It was a message from his assistant. "Reminder, fertility specialist appointment confirmed for Tuesday. Board expects update." He didn't take the phone out. He didn't need to. The message was burned into his mind. He looked at Elena, really looked at her, trying to memorize the curve of her jaw, the kindness in her eyes. He loved her. He did. But the doubt, seeded by years of pressure and now watered by the urgency of his advisors, began to take root in the back of his mind. What if the doctors were right? What if biology was the one enemy he couldn't conquer with money or power? "Let's go to bed," Elena said, breaking the tension. She moved toward him, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She wanted to believe that love was enough. She wanted to believe that when they lay down together, the world outside would cease to exist. Tomorrow is a new day. Alexander nodded, following her toward the hallway. As they walked, the grandeur of the house felt less like a home and more like a museum. Portraits of ancestors lined the walls, their painted eyes seeming to follow them, judging them. Alexander felt their gaze. He felt the expectation of centuries pressing down on his shoulders. He reached for Elena's hand again, intertwining their fingers. Her hand was small and his delicate. He wondered, not for the first time, if delicacy was enough to withstand the storm he felt coming. In the bedroom, the lights were dimmed. They changed in silence, the routine familiar yet tinged with a new sadness. When they lay down, Alexander pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. She smelled of lavender and home. "I will fix this," he whispered into the darkness, though he wasn't sure what this was anymore. Was it the company, the family pressure, or the growing distance he felt creeping into their intimacy? "Just be here," Elena murmured, her voice sleepy but heavy with emotion. "Just be Alexander. Not the Tycoon. Just my husband." He held her tighter, afraid that if he let go, she might slip away. He closed his eyes, but sleep did not come easily. He listened to her breathing, steady and calm, while his own mind raced with scenarios, with medical terms, with boardroom strategies. He loved her with every fiber of his being, but for the first time in his life, Alexander faced a problem that money could not solve and power could not intimidate. The shadow of infertility, whether real or perceived, had entered the room, and it sat between them in the dark, waiting for the morning light to reveal just how deep the crack in their foundation truly was. The rain continued to fall, sprawling gardens that demanded heirs to run through them, and the dining table that had witnessed generations of sterling men securing their legacy. He dressed slowly, the fabric of his suit feeling stiffer than usual, as if the clothes themselves were aware of the burden he was about to shoulder. Downstairs, Elena was already waiting by the door. She wore a dress of soft blue, a color that usually brightened the room, but today she looked pale, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She didn't speak as he approached, but her eyes conveyed a silent plea for unity, for protection. Alexander wanted to promise her that nothing would be said, that he would shield her from the inquiries he knew were coming. But the words stuck in his throat. He remembered the vibration of his phone last night, the reminder of the specialist appointment scheduled for later in the week. The shadow of that appointment loomed over them, darker than any cloud outside. "The car is ready, sir," the driver announced from the doorway, breaking the silence. Alexander nodded, offering his arm to Elena. She took it, her grip firm, anchoring herself to him. As they stepped into the limousine, the cityscape blurred past the tinted windows. Inside the cabin, the air was conditioned to a perfect temperature, yet a chill persisted between them. Alexander opened his tablet, pretending to review quarterly reports, but the numbers swam before his eyes, meaningless. He glanced at Elena. She was looking out the window, her reflection ghostly against the glass. "Do you want to skip it?" Alexander asked suddenly, the question escaping before he could weigh the consequences. "We could tell them we're not feeling well. Turn the car around." Elena turned to look at him, a sad smile touching her lips. "And give them more reason to talk. Alexander, if we hide, they will assume the worst. They will say we are avoiding the subject because there is no hope." She reached over and covered his hand with hers. "I would rather face them than let them whisper behind our backs. Besides, I love your mother. I just wish she loved me enough to let me be happy without conditions." Alexander turned his hand over, interlacing their fingers. "She loves you in her way. It's just, her way is complicated." "Complicated," Elena repeated softly, looking down at their joined hands. "Yes, that is a polite word for it." The estate came into view, a sprawling monument of stone and history nestled among ancient oaks. It was a place that demanded perfection. As the car pulled up to the grand entrance, Alexander felt his stomach tighten. He knew the routine. The handshake from his father, firm and assessing. The kiss on the cheek from his mother, precise and dry. The questions would not come immediately. They would wait until the wine was poured, until the guards were down, until the polite veneer of hospitality allowed for the insertion of the knife. Inside, the house smelled of lemon polish and dried flowers. His father, Arthur Sterling, stood by the fireplace, a glass of amber liquid in hand despite the early hour. His mother, Margaret, sat on the chaise lounge, arranging lilies in a vase. She looked up as they entered, her eyes sharp, missing nothing. "Alexander," Elena, Margaret said, her voice smooth as silk. "You're on time." Punctuality is a virtue often overlooked in your industry, Alexander. Business waits for no one, mother, Alexander replied, guiding Elena forward. But family comes first. Does it? Arthur asked, turning from the fire. His gaze landed on Elena, then shifted to his son. Family is the business, Alexander. Everything else is just distraction. Come, sit. Lunch is served. The dining room was vast, the table long enough to seat 20, yet only 4 places were set. The distance between them felt miles wide. Silverware clinked against china, the sound echoing in the high-ceilinged room. The first course was served in silence, a delicate soup that neither Elena nor Alexander had much appetite for. Alexander watched his wife. She held her spoon with grace, but he saw the slight tremor in her wrist. He wanted to reach under the table and hold her hand, but he knew his father would see it as a sign of weakness, a concession that they needed each other to survive the interrogation. The Johnsons were here last weekend, Margaret said casually, dabbing her mouth with a napkin. Their daughter just gave birth to triplets. Healthy boys. They say the estate feels alive again with children running around. Elena's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. She slowly lowered it back to the bowl. Alexander felt a surge of protective anger, hot and sharp, but he swallowed it. He knew that reacting would only validate the comment. That's wonderful for them, Elena said, her voice steady, though Alexander heard the strain beneath the surface. Children are a blessing. Indeed, Arthur interjected, cutting into his meat. But blessings require preparation. A legacy isn't built on hope, Elena. It's built on certainty. Alexander knows this. The company needs stability. Investors like stability. A family line provides that. Alexander set his fork down. Father, we are discussing this at another time. Today is about lunch. Is it? Margaret asked, tilting her head. Or is today about avoiding the reality that time is passing? You've been married 4 years, Alexander. In my day, a woman would have proven herself by now. Not that I doubt Elena's intentions. She is a lovely girl. But biology is not concerned with intentions. It is concerned with results. The air left the room. Elena placed her napkin on the table. She didn't look at Alexander. She looked at the lilies in the center of the table, beautiful but cut, dying slowly in the vase. Alexander felt as though he were sitting on a bed of nails. Every word his mother spoke was a needle, precise and painful. He wanted to defend Elena, to stand up and declare that their worth was not measured by reproduction. But the seed of doubt that had been planted in his mind by the board, by his father, by the society pages, began to sprout. What if they were right? What if love wasn't enough to fill the silence of a nursery mother? Please, Alexander said, his voice low, warning. That is enough. I am only concerned for your happiness, son, Margaret replied, her eyes cold. Happiness is fleeting. Legacy is forever. I would hate to see you wake up in 20 years with a full bank account and an empty house. It is a cold way to end a dynasty. Elena stood up abruptly. The chair scraped against the floor, a harsh sound in the quiet room. Excuse me, she whispered. I need some air. She walked out of the dining room, her steps measured, refusing to let them see her run. Alexander watched her go, a hollow ache forming in his chest. He looked at his father, who returned his gaze with a steely indifference. You hurt her, Alexander said, the accusation quiet but heavy. I spoke the truth, Arthur replied, taking a sip of his drink. Truth is often painful, but it is necessary. You are a leader, Alexander. Leaders make hard choices. If nature has closed one door, you must find another. That is what we do. We overcome obstacles. This isn't an obstacle to be overcome, Alexander snapped, standing up. This is my wife. She is not a broken machine part you can replace. Isn't she? Margaret asked softly. If the machine does not function, what is its purpose? Love is sentimental, Alexander. Bloodline is practical. Think about that while she catches her breath. Alexander left the table, ignoring his father's call to return. He found Elena on the terrace, standing by the stone railing, looking out over the gardens. The wind whipped her hair around her face, but she didn't move to fix it. He approached her slowly, afraid that any sudden movement might shatter her. I'm sorry, he said, standing beside her. I should have stopped them. You can't stop them, Alexander, Elena said, her voice thick with unshed tears. They see what they want to see. To them, I am just the vessel that didn't fill. It doesn't matter how much I love you. It doesn't matter how hard I try. If the result isn't there, I am nothing. You are everything, Alexander insisted, turning her to face him. He grabbed her shoulders, needing her to feel the intensity of his conviction. You are my life. Don't let them make you feel small. They are stuck in the past. We are building something new. Are we? Elena asked, searching his eyes. Or are you starting to believe them? I see it, Alexander. When your mother speaks, you look down. When your father talks about legacy, you get quiet. You are starting to think that I am the problem. No, Alexander lied, because he wasn't sure anymore. The doubt was a virus, infecting his thoughts. He wanted to believe in her, but the pressure was a physical force, crushing him from all sides. I want us to have it all. The love and the family. I don't want you to feel like you're missing out. I feel like I'm failing you, she corrected, a tear finally escaping and tracing a path down her cheek. And that is worse than failing them. Alexander pulled her into his embrace, holding her tightly against the wind. He wanted to tell her that the appointment next week would fix everything, that the doctors would find a solution and silence his parents forever. But he couldn't make that promise. The uncertainty was the true enemy. It turned love into a transaction, affection into an expectation. We will go to the specialist, he whispered into her hair. We will get answers. And whatever they are, we will face them together. I promise. Elena rested her head on his chest, listening to the beat of his heart. It was steady, strong, but she wondered if it was strong enough to withstand the weight of his family's expectations. She closed her eyes, wishing she could believe him completely. But the shadow of the Sterling legacy was long, and it stretched out before them, darkening the path ahead. They stayed on the terrace for a long time, neither speaking, just holding on to each other as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the garden. Inside the house, the lights flickered on, warm and inviting, but to Elena, they looked like eyes watching, waiting for her to stumble. She knew that when they went back inside, the polite smiles would return. The masks would be put back on. But something had shifted. The foundation had cracked. And as they walked back toward the car, hand in hand, Elena felt a cold premonition settle in her bones. This was not the end of the pressure. It was only the beginning. The expectation had become a demand, and demands, she knew, often came with ultimatums. The drive home was silent again, but the silence was no longer comfortable. It was filled with the unsaid words, the fears, and the growing distance that neither of them knew how to bridge. Alexander stared out the folded in her lap, staring at her wedding ring. It felt tighter than usual, as if her fingers had swollen with the weight of unshed tears. She wanted to reach for Alexander, to reassure him that she was still here, that she was still his wife regardless of biology. But the distance between them on the leather seat felt like a canyon. When they arrived at the fertility center, the building was imposing, all glass and sterile white stone. It lacked the warmth of a home. It was a place of solutions and problems, of data and outcomes. Alexander helped Elena out of the car, his hand on her lower back, but the touch felt procedural rather than affectionate. Inside, the air smelled of antiseptic and lavender, a futile attempt to mask the clinical reality. The waiting room was filled with other couples, each carrying their own unique burden of hope and despair. Some held hands tightly, knuckles white. Others sat apart, staring at magazines they weren't reading. Elena sat down, pulling her coat tighter around herself, feeling exposed despite the fabric. Alexander stood by the window, checking his watch, then his phone, then the window again. He was a man used to controlling outcomes, but here, he was powerless. Mr. and Mrs. Sterling, a nurse, called out, her voice cheerful in a way that felt jarring against the somber mood. They followed her down a long, white corridor. The sound of their footsteps echoed, rhythmic and lonely. They were ushered into a consultation room that was small and impersonal. A desk sat in the corner, covered in files and a computer monitor. Dr. Vance entered a few minutes later, bustling in with a tablet in hand and a stethoscope around his neck. He was a man of reputation, recommended by the best, but today he looked harried, his hair slightly disheveled, his eyes tired. He offered a quick smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Good afternoon," Dr. Vance said, sitting behind the desk and tapping on his tablet. "I've reviewed the preliminary tests you both submitted last week. Let's not waste time. I know you're busy people." Alexander nodded, his jaw tight. "We just want the truth, doctor. Whatever it is." "Of course," Vance replied, scrolling through the screen. He didn't look up at them immediately. He was focused on the data, the numbers that define probabilities. "Alexander, your counts are within normal ranges." "Excellent, actually. No issues on the male side." He glanced up briefly, then returned to the screen. "Elena, however, the hormonal panel and the ultrasound imaging indicate some significant concerns." Elena's breath hitched. She gripped the arms of her chair. Concerned, she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Dr. Vance sighed, leaning back and finally looking at them. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Look, I'm going to be direct. The lining thickness is below optimal standards, and your hormone levels suggest a condition that makes natural conception highly improbable. We're talking about less than a 5% chance without significant intervention. And even with IVF, the success rate is complicated. The room seemed to tilt. Alexander felt the floor drop away beneath him. 5%. The number echoed in his mind, cold and final. He looked at Elena. She had gone pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and shame. She looked as though she had been accused of a crime she didn't commit, but felt guilty for nonetheless. Is it impossible? Alexander asked, his voice sounding distant to his own ears. I never say impossible, Dr. Vance said, putting his glasses back on. He seemed eager to move on, perhaps to the next patient waiting outside. But medically speaking, it is highly unlikely. Your body is fighting against conception, Elena. It's a physiological barrier. We can try treatments, but they are invasive, expensive, and there are no guarantees. Sometimes, nature simply dictates a different path. Elena looked down at her hands. So, I'm broken, she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Not broken, Dr. Vance corrected hastily, though his tone lacked conviction. Just limited. It happens. Many couples face this. You have options. Surrogacy, adoption, donor eggs. But carrying a child yourself, the risks are high and the likelihood is low. Alexander stood up abruptly. The chair scraped against the floor, a harsh sound that made Elena flinch. He couldn't look at her. If he looked at her, he would see the devastation, and he wasn't sure he could handle it. He walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot below. Cars came and went, people living their lives, unaffected by the verdict delivered in this room. He thought of his father's words at lunch. Legacy is forever. He thought of the board of directors. He thought of the empty nursery that would never be filled. The love he felt for Elena was real, but it was suddenly competing with a primal instinct to secure his future, an instinct drilled into him since birth. Thank you, Doctor, Alexander said, his voice flat. We'll consider the options. Take some time, Dr. Vance said, handing them a printed summary. He didn't notice the way Elena's hand trembled as she took the paper. Don't rush into decisions. But realistically, you should prepare yourselves. They left the office in silence. The walk back to the car felt like a funeral procession. The rain had picked up again, drumming against the pavement. Alexander opened the car door for Elena, a gesture of chivalry that felt hollow now. She slid into the seat, clutching the medical report in her lap, as if it were a death warrant. Alexander got in the driver's side, but didn't start the engine immediately. He rested his hands on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead through the wet windshield. Alexander, Elena said, her voice cracking. Please say something. He closed his eyes. He wanted to tell her that it didn't matter. He wanted to tell her that he loved her more than any heir, any company, any legacy. But the words felt like lies. The doubt had taken root, watered by the doctor's clinical dismissal and his father's pressure. He feared that if they tried and failed again, the bitterness would destroy them anyway. He feared watching her hope die slowly over years of treatments. It's not your fault, Alexander said, though the words sounded rehearsed. Biology is unpredictable. But I feel like I've failed you, Elena whispered, a tear finally spilling over. I promised you a family. I promised you everything. You didn't promise anything, Alexander replied, turning to look at her. His eyes were dark, filled with a conflict she couldn't fully see. You gave me yourself. That was the promise. Then why do you look at me like I'm a stranger, she asked, the pain evident in her voice. Alexander flinched. He hadn't realized he was doing it. He reached out to touch her face, but stopped halfway, his hand hovering in the air before dropping back to his side. I'm not looking at you like a stranger, Elena. I'm looking at you like someone I love too much to watch suffer. If the doctor is right, the treatments, they will hurt you. They will drain you. I can't watch that happen. So what are you saying, Elena asked, fear gripping her heart. Are you giving up? I'm saying we need to think, Alexander said, starting the engine. The car hummed to life, a mechanical sound that separated them from the silence. We need to think about what is best. For you. For us. Maybe we need to step back. Let the pressure off. Step back, Elena repeated, the phrase hanging in the air. It sounded like a euphemism for leaving. She looked out the window, watching the rain blur the world outside. She felt alone, even with him sitting right beside her. The diagnosis felt like a wall had been built between them, brick by brick, in that sterile office. She didn't know that the doctor had glanced at the wrong file index for a split second, that his fatigue had led to a hasty conclusion. She didn't know that her body was capable of life. All she knew was the verdict of the man in the white coat and the withdrawal of the man beside her. As they drove back toward the penthouse, the city lights began to twinkle on, indifferent to the heartbreak unfolding in the car. Alexander kept his eyes on the road, his mind racing with calculations and contingencies. Elena held the paper report in her lap, crumpling the edge unconsciously. She felt a coldness settling in her chest, a premonition that this appointment was not the end of their struggle, but the beginning of the end of their marriage. The rain continued to fall, washing over the car, isolating them in a bubble of grief, unaware that the truth was still hidden, waiting for a time when the pain would be deep enough to make her reflection visible in the polished steel doors. She looked smaller than usual, her shoulders hunched slightly as if protecting herself from an invisible blow. The medical report lay folded on the small console table in the foyer where she had placed it upon entering. It was a piece of paper, thin and insignificant, yet it had managed to dismantle 4 years of marriage in the span of a 20-minute drive. Alexander walked into the living room, but did not turn on the main lights. The city glow filtered through the windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. He loosened his tie, the silk feeling like a noose around his neck. He could feel Elena standing behind him, waiting. He knew he had to speak. The silence was becoming unbearable, a heavy blanket smothering the oxygen in the room. He turned around slowly, facing her. She was still wearing her coat, as if she were ready to leave at any moment, though she had not moved toward the door. "Elena," Alexander began, his voice rough. He cleared his throat, trying to find the right words. There were no right words for this. What the doctor said, it changes things. Elena didn't move. Her eyes were dry now, the tears exhausted. From the car ride. "It changes everything," she corrected softly. "Or at least, that's what you believe." "I believe that I cannot ask you to go through what he described," Alexander said, walking toward the fireplace. He needed something to do with his hands, so he picked up a small sculpture, turning it over and over. The treatments, the procedures, the emotional toll. "I saw your face in there, Elena. You were devastated. I cannot be the cause of that devastation every month. Every year." "You are not the cause," Elena said, her voice gaining a slight edge. "Biology is the cause. Fate is the cause. You are my husband. Your job is to stand beside me, not to decide what I can endure." Alexander put the sculpture down with a sharp click. "And what if you can't endure it? What if we spend 5 years trying, spending fortunes, hurting ourselves, and at the end we still have nothing? What then? Elena, will we still love each other? Or will there be resentment? Will I look at you and see the child we don't have? Will you look at me and see the pressure I put on you?" The questions hung in the air, toxic and probing. Elena walked toward the sofa and sat down, her legs suddenly feeling weak. She looked at the medical report on the table. "So you are protecting yourself," she said, the realization hitting her hard. "You are afraid that eventually you will resent me. So you are leaving before you do." "I am protecting us both," Alexander insisted, though he felt a pang of guilt strike his chest. "I am giving you freedom. If we separate, the pressure stops. My parents cannot bother you anymore. The board cannot ask you questions. You can live your life without the shadow of my legacy hanging over you. You deserve peace, Elena. I am giving you peace." Elena laughed, a brittle, humorless sound. "Peace you call abandonment? Peace." She stood up again, walking toward him. She stopped just out of reach. "Alexander, listen to yourself. You are talking about ending our marriage because of a probability. A doctor gave you statistics, and you are treating them like a death sentence. Where is the fight? Where is the man who told me he would conquer the world for me? This isn't the world," Alexander snapped, his composure cracking. "This is my family. This is my duty. I cannot ignore it. And I cannot ask you to sacrifice your health for my duty. It is selfish of me to keep you here if I cannot give you the life you deserve. A life with children. A family. You think I care more about children than I care about you?" Elena asked, her voice trembling. "Is that what you think, that I married you for a dynasty?" "No," Alexander said, looking away. "But I know you want children. I know you love children. And I am denying you that. By staying with me, you are signing up for a life without them. Is that fair? I am letting you go so you can find someone who can give you that. Someone without my complications." The irony was suffocating. He was pushing her away to save her, but all he was doing was confirming her deepest fear that she was not enough. That the wife was expendable if the mother could not be produced. Elena felt a cold resolve settle over her. The sadness was still there, aching in her chest, but it was being replaced by a need for self-preservation. She could not stay in a home where she was tolerated but not fully accepted. She could not stay with a man who loved her conditionally. "You are making this decision for me," Elena said quietly. "You are deciding what is best for my life without asking me what I want. You say you love me, Alexander, but love is not control. Love is not deciding who I should be with because you think you are failing me." "I am failing you," he whispered. "Then let me decide if you are," she replied. "But you have already decided. Haven't you? You walked out of that clinic and you started planning the exit. I see it in your eyes. You are already gone." Alexander didn't deny it. He couldn't. The seed had grown too fast. The pressure from his father, the words of the doctor, the fear of the future, it had all coalesced into this moment. He nodded slowly, a gesture of defeat. I think we need time apart. To see if we can exist without this pressure. To see if we can breathe." "Breathe," Elena repeated. She walked over to the console table and picked up the medical report. She looked at it for a long moment, then placed it back down neatly. "I will pack a bag." Alexander flinched. "Elena, you don't have to leave tonight. We can discuss the logistics." "There is nothing to discuss," she said, turning toward the hallway. "If you need space, I will give you space. But I will not wait in this house for you to decide if I am worthy of staying. I will not be a guest in my own marriage." She walked down the hall to their bedroom. The room smelled of him, of sandalwood and rain. It felt like a stranger's room now. She opened the closet and pulled out a suitcase. She did not pack wildly. She folded her clothes with precise movements, each fold a suppression of a sob. She took her essentials, her books, the few personal items that belonged solely to her. She left the things he had given her, the jewelry, the coats, the gifts. Those belonged to the wife of the Tycoon, and she was no longer sure she wanted to be her. Alexander stood in the living room, listening to the sounds of her packing. The zip of the suitcase, the soft thud of shoes, the opening and closing of drawers. Each sound was a nail in the coffin of their life together. He wanted to go down the hall. He wanted to burst into the room and sweep her into his arms and tell her that none of it mattered. But his feet felt rooted to the floor. The fear was paralyzing. The fear of failure, the fear of his father's disappointment, the fear of a childless future. It was stronger than his love in this moment, and he hated himself for it. Elena emerged from the hallway 10 minutes later. She wore a coat over her dress, the suitcase rolling silently behind her. She looked composed, regal even, but her eyes were red-rimmed. She stopped in front of him. Alexander stood straight, his hands clenched at his sides. "I will stay at the guest apartment in the city," Elena said. "The one my friend owns. Do not call me unless it is urgent." "Elena," Alexander said, his voice breaking. "Please, don't make this permanent." "You are the one making it permanent, Alexander," she said. "You are the one choosing the legacy over the life. I am just accepting your choice." She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I hope you find what you are looking for. I hope the silence of this house brings you the peace you think you need." She turned toward the door. Alexander took a step forward, instinctively reaching out. "Wait." She paused, her hand on the handle, but she did not turn around. "If you walk out that door," Alexander said, desperation creeping into his tone, "I don't know if I can bring you back." "I know," Elena replied. She opened the door. The sound of the rain from the hallway rushed in, louder than before. "That is the risk you are taking." She stepped out into the corridor. The door clicked shut behind her, a soft, final sound that echoed through the penthouse. Alexander stood alone in the vast living room. The city lights twinkled outside, indifferent and cold. He walked to the window and looked down. He saw her exit the building moments later, a small figure hailing a cab in the rain. She didn't look up. She didn't look back. He turned away from the window and walked back to the console table. He picked up the medical report. He stared at the words, the percentages, the clinical assessment of her worth. He threw it into the fireplace. The paper curled and blackened as the flames caught it, turning the diagnosis into ash. But burning the paper did not change the reality. The house was silent. The warmth was gone. He had wanted to protect her from the pressure, but in doing so, he had become the pressure himself. He had pushed away the only person who had ever loved him for himself, not for his name. Alexander sank onto the sofa, the same sofa where they had sat just days ago, holding hands. Now the cushion beside him was empty. He buried his face in his hands, the weight of the empire feeling heavier than ever. He had secured his freedom from the immediate scrutiny, but he had lost his sanctuary. The rain continued to batter the windows, a relentless rhythm that matched the pounding of his heart. He closed his eyes, trying to imagine a future where he was successful, wealthy, and alone. It looked like a prison, but it was too late to call her back tonight. The decision was made. The separation had begun. And somewhere in the city, Elena was crying in a taxi, wondering how a love so strong could be the city light. The silence that followed was not peaceful. It was aggressive, pressing against his eardrums, demanding he acknowledge the void she had left behind. He walked slowly to the window, looking down into the street. The rain had intensified, creating a blur of gray and black below. He saw the yellow cab pull up to the curb. He watched the door open, saw her slide into the back seat, a solitary figure swallowed by the vehicle. The taillights glowed red, like fading embers, before the car merged into the traffic and disappeared into the night. Alexander turned away from the window. The penthouse felt cavernous, every shadow stretching longer than before. He walked to the console table where the medical report lay. He picked it up, the paper crisp and cold in his hand. He wanted to tear it apart, to destroy the evidence of the diagnosis that had driven them apart, but he couldn't. It was the truth, or at least the truth as he knew it. He placed it back down, precisely where it had been. He walked into the living room and poured a glass of whiskey, the liquid amber catching the light. He took a sip, the burn doing little to warm the chill in his chest. He looked at the sofa where they had sat together just hours ago. The cushion on her side was still indented. He reached out and touched the fabric, as if he could still feel the warmth of her presence. It was cold. Peace, he whispered to the empty room, testing the word she had thrown back at him. Is this what peace feels like? There was no answer. The city hummed outside, indifferent to his turmoil. He took another drink and walked to his study. The phone on his desk began to ring. It was his assistant, calling about the morning schedule. He looked at the phone, then at the dark room. He picked up the receiver. Cancel everything for tomorrow, he said, his voice hollow. Reschedule the board meeting. I need to work. He hung up and sat in his leather chair. He opened his laptop, the screen glowing brightly in the dark. He began to work. He reviewed contracts, analyzed mergers, signed documents. He worked through the night, through the sunrise, through the next day. Work was the only thing that made sense. Work had rules. Work had outcomes. Love had neither. He buried himself in the numbers, letting the data drown out the memory of Elena's eyes as she walked out the door. He told himself he was doing the right thing. He told himself she would be happier, without the burden of his legacy. But every time he signed his name, the letters looked like a confession. Across the city, Elena sat in the back of the cab, watching the rain streak the window. The driver glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Rough night, he asked, his voice kind. Elena nodded, unable to speak. Her throat was tight, constricted by the effort of holding back the sobs that threatened to overwhelm her. Just take me to the address, she managed to whisper. The apartment belonged to her friend, Sarah. It was small, modest, nothing like the penthouse. It smelled of old wood and coffee, a lived-in scent that felt foreign to Elena after years of sterile luxury. Sarah opened the door before Elena could knock, her face etched with concern. She didn't ask questions. She simply took the suitcase from Elena's hand and pulled her into a hug. Elena crumbled in her arms, the composure she had maintained in front of Alexander finally shattering. She cried until her body shook, until there were no tears left, only a raw, aching hollow. You don't have to stay here forever, Sarah said softly, handing her a mug of tea later that night. But you need to rest. I can't go back, Elena said, her voice raspy. He thinks he's saving me, but he's just sending me away. Then you build something new, Sarah said firmly. You are strong, Elena. Stronger than him. Elena looked at her hands. She thought about the doctor's words. Highly unlikely. She thought about Alexander's face. I am failing you. She realized then that staying would only confirm his fears. She had to prove to herself that she was whole, even without him. Even without a child. She took a sip of the tea. I need a job, she said. Something quiet. Something mine. The weeks turned into months. The seasons changed outside, painting the city in hues of autumn gold and winter white. Alexander remained in the penthouse, but he rarely slept there. He slept in his office on the leather couch, waking up to the glow of monitors. He lost weight. His suits hung looser on his frame. His assistants whispered about his intensity, his refusal to take a break. He became a machine, exactly what his father wanted, yet he felt less like a man than ever before. He avoided the social circuit. He declined invitations. He couldn't bear to see couples dancing, laughing, holding hands. He couldn't bear the questions about Elena. "Where is your wife?" they would ask. Traveling, he would lie. The lie became a routine, a shield against the pity he saw in their eyes. Elena found work at a small library downtown. It was quiet, filled with the smell of paper and ink. She organized books, helped children find stories, and lived a life invisible to the society pages. She used a different name professionally. She cut her hair shorter. She changed her style. She wanted to be unrecognizable. She wanted to be free. But freedom came with a loneliness that mirrored Alexander's. She would walk home in the evenings, passing families in the park. She would see fathers pushing strollers, mothers holding toddlers' hands. Her heart would ache with a longing so sharp it felt physical. She had accepted the diagnosis. She had accepted the separation. But she had not accepted the silence in her own home. Then, 3 months after the separation, the silence broke. Not with a sound, but with a sensation. Elena woke up one morning feeling nauseous. She assumed it was stress, the lingering toll of the breakup. She went to work, but the feeling persisted. Days turned into a week. Her cycle was late. She stood in the bathroom of her small apartment, staring at her reflection. She looked pale, tired. She remembered the doctor's words. Less than 5%. She remembered Alexander's resignation. It is highly unlikely. She bought a test from a pharmacy on the corner, hiding it in her bag beneath a scarf. Back in her apartment, she waited. The minutes stretched like hours. When she looked at the result, her breath stopped. 2 lines. Clear and undeniable. She sat on the edge of the bathtub, the plastic stick in her hand, trembling. She laughed, a sound that was half sob, half disbelief. The doctor was wrong. She was not broken. She was not empty. Her first instinct was to call Alexander. She reached for her phone, her finger hovering over his number. She imagined his voice. She imagined the hope that would spark in his eyes. But then she remembered the look on his face when he left her at the door. "I am letting you go. You deserve peace." If she told him now, would he come back for her, or would he come back for the child? Would the pressure return? Would his parents descend upon her again? Treating her like a vessel that had finally functioned, she looked at her reflection in the mirror. She saw a woman who had survived the loss of her marriage. She saw a woman who was standing on her own feet. She put the phone down. She couldn't risk it. Not yet. Not until she knew she was strong enough to face him, not as a wife seeking approval, but as a mother protecting her own. She flushed the test. She would keep this secret. She would build a life for this child, a life where love was not conditional on legacy. The months rolled into years. Elena moved to a slightly larger apartment in a quieter neighborhood. She told Sarah the truth, and Sarah became her confidant, her ally. When the time came, she gave birth alone, with only Sarah and a midwife present. Twins, a boy and a girl. They were perfect. They had Alexander's eyes, dark and intense, but her smile. She named them Leo and Mia. She raised them with love, with stories, with the honesty that spared them the bitterness she felt. She told them their father was a man who loved them but couldn't be there. She didn't speak ill of him. She kept the image of him clean for their sake. Alexander, meanwhile, continued his ascent. He became the most powerful man in the city. His company expanded globally. But his personal life remained a barren landscape. He dated occasionally, women who were impressed by his name, his wealth. But none of them stayed. None of them looked at him the way Elena had. He would walk into a room and feel the absence of her laughter. He would see a woman with her hair, her walk, and his heart would stop, only to break again when he realized it wasn't her. He visited the estate less. His father stopped asking about heirs, sensing the defeat in his son's eyes. The legacy would end with him. Alexander accepted this as his penance. He had chosen the empire over the heart, and now he ruled over a kingdom of one. For years passed. For years of silence. For years of missed birthdays, unspoken milestones, and hidden growth. Elena watched her children grow. They were vibrant, curious, full of life. They asked about their father sometimes. "Why isn't he here?" Leo would ask. "He is busy," Elena would say. "But he knows we exist," Mia would ask. Elena would pause. "He will know one day," she would promise. She knew she couldn't keep them hidden forever. They were half him. They deserved to know their father. And Alexander. Alexander deserved to know the truth. The truth that he had not failed. The truth that life had found a way despite the odds. She began to prepare. She took a job that would bring her back into the social sphere, a charity position that would put her on the same radar as his company. She waited for the right moment. She wanted him to see them, not hear about them. She wanted the shock to be undeniable. She wanted him to look at his children and see the lie of the diagnosis shattered before his eyes. Alexander sat in his office one evening, looking at a calendar. It was the anniversary of the day she left. He didn't need the calendar to remind him. He felt it in his bones. He picked up a framed photo from his desk. It was from their wedding day. They looked so young, so sure. He traced her face with his thumb. "Where are you, Elena?" he whispered. "I hope you are happy. I hope you found what I couldn't give you." He didn't know that happiness was waiting for him, growing taller every day, learning to speak, learning to walk, waiting for the moment the silence would break. The city lights twinkled outside, same as they had 4 years ago. But the story was no longer about a separation. It was about a reunion waiting to happen. The silence had served its purpose. It had protected the children. It had strengthened the mother. Now it was time for the truth. The pieces were moving into place. The gala invitation was sent. The names were on the list. The storm was coming, not of rain, but of revelation. And when it broke, it would change state of suspended animation. The furniture remained where they had placed it together. The books on the shelf were still arranged by the color she preferred. The air still held the faint, ghostly scent of her lavender perfume, though logic told him it should have vanished years ago. It was as if he were living in a museum dedicated to a life he had voluntarily extinguished. He turned from the window, the silk of his robe whispering against the floor, and walked to the kitchen. He made coffee for one. The ritual was precise, mechanical. 1 cup. 1 spoon of sugar. No cream. He stood at the counter and drank it standing up, staring at the empty stool beside him. "Good morning, sir," the housekeeper said softly from the doorway. She was new, hired 2 years ago, but she had learned quickly not to expect conversation. "Morning, Martha," Alexander replied, his voice raspy from disuse. "You can leave the rest of the day off. I won't be needing dinner." "Very good, sir." She hesitated, looking at the single cup in his hand. "It's a beautiful day, Mr. Sterling. The park is lovely this time of year." Alexander nodded, though he had no intention of going to the park. Parks were for families. Parks were for people who had somewhere to be, someone to hold hands with. He finished the coffee and placed the cup in the sink. He didn't let Martha wash it. He wanted to feel the weight of the ceramic, the warmth fading from it. It was a small penance. He walked to his study to prepare for the day. The empire he had built was vast now. Sterling Industries had acquired 3 major competitors in the last year alone. His name was synonymous with power, with invincibility. The newspapers called him the Iron Titan. They wrote profiles about his work ethic, his visionary leadership, his unyielding focus. They did not write about the nights he spent sitting in the dark, listening to the silence. They did not know that the biggest merger he had ever secured felt like ash in his mouth. At the office, the atmosphere was electric. The boardroom was filled with executives, all standing as he entered. The applause was thunderous. They had just closed the deal of the decade. Stocks were soaring. Bonuses would be substantial. Alexander walked to the head of the table and placed his hands on the leather surface. He looked at the faces around him. They were smiling, eager, alive. "Thank you," Alexander said, his voice cutting through the noise. The room fell silent instantly. This is a significant achievement. But remember, success is not just about the numbers. It is about sustainability. He paused. He had almost said legacy, but the word stuck in his throat. What legacy? There was no one to inherit this. No one to teach the ropes to. No small hands to hold the keys of the kingdom. The thought was a familiar ache, a dull throb in the center of his chest that never fully went away. "Dismissed," he said quietly. The executives filed out, buzzing with excitement. His assistant, Marcus, remained behind, organizing the files. Marcus was one of the few people who had been with him since before the separation. He had seen the change in Alexander. He had seen the light go out. "Sir," Marcus said, hesitating as he stacked the papers. "There is the gala next week. The Children's Hospital benefit. Your presence is expected. It's the biggest event of the season." Alexander loosened his tie, feeling the constriction around his neck. "Do I have to go? It would be good for morale," Marcus said gently. "And the donors are asking. They want to see you. They want to know the company is stable." "I am stable," Alexander said, looking out the window of his office. Below, the street was crowded with people. He saw a woman pushing a stroller. She was laughing, pointing at something to a child hidden from view. His breath hitched. He looked away quickly, unable to bear the sight. "Fine. Put it on the schedule. But I won't make a speech." "Understood," Marcus said. He watched his boss for a moment. "Sir, if you don't mind me saying, you work too hard. Have you thought about taking a vacation, maybe seeing someone?" Alexander turned back, his expression hardening. "I see people every day, Marcus." "You know what I mean?" Marcus pressed, risking the boundary of their professional relationship. "You are alone, Alexander. It's been 4 years. Grief doesn't have a timeline, but neither does life. You are still young. You could find happiness again." "Happiness," Alexander repeated, the word tasting foreign. "I have everything a man could want, Marcus. Power, wealth, respect. What more is there? Someone to share it with," Marcus replied softly. "Otherwise, it's just noise." Alexander didn't answer. He picked up his jacket and walked out. Marcus's words echoed in his mind as he descended in the private elevator. Someone to share it with. He had pushed that someone away to protect her. Or so he told himself. Now, in the quiet of his car, the justification felt thin. He had protected her from his family, yes. But he had also protected himself from the pain of trying and failing. He had chosen the easy pain of absence over the hard work of presence. The driver navigated through the traffic. Alexander looked out the tinted window. The city was alive. Couples walked dogs. Friends laughed outside cafes. Fathers lifted children onto their shoulders. Every scene was a reminder of what he had sacrificed. He closed his eyes, leaning his head back against the seat. He tried to remember Elena's voice. Sometimes the memory was fading. He could remember the color of her eyes, the way she smiled, but the sound of her laughter was becoming distant, like a radio station losing signal. That terrified him more than anything. To lose the memory of her was to lose her completely. "Home, sir?" the driver asked as they pulled up to the penthouse. "Yes," Alexander said. He went inside. The housekeeper had left. The silence rushed in to greet him, heavy and suffocating. He walked to the living room and sat on the sofa. He picked up the framed photo from the side table. It was the one from their wedding. He traced the glass over her face. "I did it, Elena," he whispered to the image. "We own the market. We expanded into Asia. Everything is perfect. Just like father wanted." He waited for a response that never came. The photo remained silent. "Why isn't it enough?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Why do I feel like I have nothing?" He stood up and walked to the balcony. The wind was cool tonight. He looked down at the street. He imagined her out there somewhere. Was she happy? Had she found someone who could give her the children? He couldn't. The thought brought a sharp pang of jealousy, followed immediately by guilt. He wanted her to be happy. He had to want that. That was the condition of his love for her. But the selfish part of him, the part he kept locked away, hoped she was as lonely as he was. He hoped she thought of him. He hoped she missed him. His phone buzzed on the table inside. He ignored it. He knew who it was. His mother. She called every Sunday. She never asked about Elena anymore. She had accepted the separation as a strategic move. She talked about cousins, about potential matches, about adopting a child to secure the line. He had stopped answering those calls. He couldn't bring himself to explain that he didn't want a substitute. He wanted the original. He wanted the love that came with the person, not the transaction of an heir. He went back inside and poured a drink. He didn't drink it. He just held the glass, watching the liquid swirl. He thought about the gala next week. Marcus said it was for the children's hospital. Children. The word made his stomach turn. He usually avoided events involving children. They were too bright, too loud, too full of future. But this year, something compelled him. Maybe it was the hope that doing something good would balance the scales. Maybe it was just boredom. Or maybe deep down, his soul was trying to lead him back to the place where the truth was waiting. He walked to his study and opened the safe. Inside, among the bonds and deeds, was a small box. He opened it. Inside was Elena's wedding ring. She had left it on the console table the night she left. He had picked it up and put it away. He had never worn it again. He took it out and held it in his palm. It was small, delicate. It fit perfectly in his hand, but it belonged on hers. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the ring. "I was so afraid of failing you that I failed us." He put the ring back in the box and locked the safe. He couldn't wear it. It was a symbol of a promise he had broken. But he couldn't throw it away. It was the only tangible proof that she had been real, that their love had existed outside of his imagination. The night deepened. Alexander sat in his chair, the city lights blinking around him like distant stars. He felt old, though he was only in his 30s. He felt worn out by a battle that had ended years ago. He closed his eyes and let his mind wander. He imagined a different path. What if he had stood up to his father? What if he had told the doctor to check again? What if he had held onto her hand and refused to let go? The possibilities were endless, and each one was a road not taken. He stood up and turned off the lights. He would go to bed. He would sleep, or try to. Tomorrow was another day of meetings, of numbers, of pretending that this was enough. But as he lay in the dark, the silence of the room seemed to speak to him. It told him that success was hollow without love. It told him that a legacy was nothing if there was no one to remember it. And it told him, quietly, that the story was not over. The universe had a way of correcting mistakes. The truth had a way of surfacing. Alexander drifted off to sleep, unaware that across the city, Elena was putting 2 small children to bed. He didn't know that Leo had asked about his father again today. He didn't know that Mia had drawn a picture of a man with a tall building behind him. He didn't know that the invitation to the gala had already been delivered to Elena's home, and she had accepted. The threads of their lives were pulling tight, drawing closer with every passing hour. The loneliness of the top was about to be interrupted. The silence was about to be broken. But for now, in the quiet of the night, Alexander slept alone, dreaming of a woman who was no longer there, while the future waited patiently in the wings, ready to step into the light. The city slept around him, millions of souls dreaming their own dreams. Here, there were no towering spires of glass, only the brick walls of neighboring buildings and the occasional flicker of a street lamp. The silence in her home was not empty. It was filled with the soft, rhythmic breathing of 2 children sleeping in the room next door. Leo and Mia, 4 years old. Perfect. She sat at her small kitchen table, a cup of herbal tea cooling in front of her. Sarah sat across from her, watching her friend with eyes full of concern and anticipation. "Are you sure about this?" Sarah asked, her voice low so as not to wake the children. "Tomorrow is a big step. Once you walk into that room, there's no going back." Elena traced the rim of her mug. Her heart was beating faster than it had in years. "I have to be sure. They deserve to know him. And he deserves to know the truth." She looked up, her eyes glistening in the dim light. "Do you remember the day I found out?" Sarah nodded softly. "I remember. You were shaking so hard you could barely hold the phone." Elena closed her eyes, and suddenly the kitchen faded. The smell of herbal tea was replaced by the sterile scent of antiseptic. The quiet hum of the refrigerator became the beep of medical monitors. She was back there, 4 years ago, just weeks after she had left Alexander. The memory washed over her with the force of a tidal wave, vivid and painful. She had gone to a different clinic that day, one recommended by Sarah, far away from the sterling network of doctors. She had needed a second opinion. She had needed to know if the verdict was truly final. She remembered the waiting room, crowded and noisy, so different from the exclusive silence of Dr. Vance's office. She remembered clutching her purse, her knuckles white. When her name was called, she walked into the exam room feeling like a convict going to sentencing. Dr. Evans was older than Vance, with kind eyes behind thick glasses. He had reviewed her file, frowning slightly. "There seems to be a discrepancy here," he had said, his voice calm. "The previous report indicates hormonal infertility, but your recent blood work suggests otherwise." Elena had frozen. Otherwise, she had whispered, afraid to hope. Dr. Evans had turned the screen toward her. "Your levels are normal, Elena. More than normal. Actually, looking at these markers." He had paused, looking at her with a sudden realization. "When was your last cycle?" Elena had done the math in her head. Her breath had caught. I thought it was stress. I haven't had one in 6 weeks." Dr. Evans had smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached his eyes. "Elena, I don't think you have a fertility issue. I think you're already pregnant." The world had stopped. The sound of the traffic outside the window vanished. The only thing she could hear was the pounding of her own heart. Pregnant. The word echoed in her mind, impossible and miraculous. The doctor who had told her she was broken had been wrong. Hurried. Careless. She was not a vessel that failed. She was a mother. "I need to run an ultrasound to be sure," Dr. Evans had said. "But I'm fairly confident." When the image appeared on the screen, a small flicker of life, a tiny heartbeat pulsing like a drum, Elena had. Broken. She hadn't cried tears of sadness. She had cried tears of relief, of vindication, of overwhelming joy. But beneath the joy, a cold fear had settled. Alexander. His family. The pressure. If she told him now, would he believe her, or would he think she was manipulating him to come back? Would his parents treat her like a prize mare that had finally conceived? She remembered standing in the parking lot after the appointment, the sun shining brightly, feeling entirely alone. She had held her phone, Alexander's number on the screen. Her thumb hovered over the call button. She had imagined his voice. "Are you sure? Did you go to a specialist?" She imagined his mother's voice. Finally, she imagined the life she would return to. The scrutiny. The pressure to not lose this child. The fear that if something went wrong, it would be her fault again. She lowered the phone. She couldn't do it. Not yet. She needed to be strong enough to stand on her own first. She needed to know that she was Elena, not just the mother of his heir. So she had deleted the number. She had moved. She had hidden. The memory faded, and Elena opened her eyes. She was back in her kitchen. Sarah was reaching across the table, holding her hand. "You did what you had to do," Sarah said firmly. "You protected them. And you protected yourself." "I denied him for years," Elena whispered, guilt tightening her throat. "He thinks he lost everything because of me. He thinks he failed. He made his choice," Sarah reminded her. "He chose the legacy over you. You chose the life over the legacy. Tomorrow, you show him that life isn't one or the other. It's both." Elena stood up and walked to the doorway of the children's room. She pushed the door open just enough to see them. Leo was sprawled across his bed, one arm hanging off the side. Mia was curled into a ball, clutching a stuffed bear. They looked so peaceful. They had Alexander's dark hair, his strong brow. They were living proof that the diagnosis was a lie. They were the truth made flesh. Elena touched her own stomach, flat now, but forever changed by the life that had grown there. She thought about Alexander sleeping in his penthouse. Did he dream of her? Did he dream of children? He thought he would never have. The irony was bitter and sweet all at once. The thing he wanted most was sleeping down the hall. The thing she wanted most was for him to see them without the shadow of his empire falling over them. "Go to sleep, Elena," Sarah said softly from the kitchen. "You need your rest. Tomorrow you need to be strong." "I'm not afraid," Elena said, though her hands were trembling slightly. "I'm just ready." She closed the door softly and turned off the hallway light. She walked to her bedroom and stood in front of the mirror. She looked older than she had 4 years ago. There were lines around her eyes, marks of sleepless nights and single-handed struggles. But there was also a strength there that hadn't existed before. She was not the same woman who had walked out of the penthouse in tears. She was a mother. She was a survivor. She opened her closet and touched the dress hanging there. It was elegant, simple, but commanding. She had chosen it carefully, not to impress him, but to show him who she had become. She ran her hand over the fabric. Tomorrow, the silence would end. The secret that had grown in the dark for 4 years would step into the light. She thought about the doctor's words again. "I think you're already pregnant." Those words had saved her life. They had given her a purpose when she felt worthless. But keeping them hidden had cost her too. It had cost her the shared joy of the first kick. It had cost Alexander the chance to be there for the first heartbeat. It had cost them 4 years of shared life. "I'm sorry," she whispered to her reflection. "I'm sorry I had to hide you. But I promise no more hiding." She turned away from the mirror and lay down on her bed. She didn't turn on the light. She lay in the darkness, listening to the city breathe. Somewhere out there, Alexander was sleeping. Tomorrow, their worlds would collide. She wondered if he would be angry. She wondered if he would be happy. She wondered if love could survive the truth after so much time. She closed her eyes, letting the image of the ultrasound scan float in her mind. That tiny flicker had become Leo's laugh. That tiny pulse had become Mia's hug. They were real. They were here. And tomorrow, Alexander would see them. The thought sent a shiver down her spine. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. It was inevitable. The night stretched on, the hours ticking by slowly. Elena drifted in and out of sleep, her mind racing with scenarios. What would he say? What would he do? Would he try to take them? Would he try to take her back? She didn't know. But she knew one thing. She would not let anyone take her children away. Not even their father. She had built this life brick by brick. She would defend it. But as dawn began to break, painting the sky in soft grays and pinks, her fear subsided. She realized that this wasn't about defense. It was about connection. She wasn't bringing them to him to hurt him. She was bringing them to him to heal him. And maybe to heal herself. The wall between them had been built on a lie. A medical error. A misunderstanding. Tomorrow, the wall would come down. She sat up as the sun touched the window. It was time. She went to the bathroom and splashed water on her face. She looked at herself again. Ready. She walked to the children's room and woke them gently. Good morning, she whispered. Today is a big day. Leo rubbed his eyes. Are we going to the party? Yes, Elena said, smoothing his hair. We are going to meet someone important. Who? Mia asked, yawning. Elena smiled, a sad, hopeful smile. Someone who will be very happy to see you. She dressed them in matching outfits, elegant and neat. She dressed herself with care. When they were ready, she looked at them. They were beautiful. They were perfect. They were the surprise that would change everything. Let's go, she said, taking their hands. They walked out of the apartment, into the morning light. The city was waking up. People were rushing to work, to school, to life. Elena walked with them, her head high. She didn't look back. She looked forward. To the gala. To the truth. To the end of the silence. The taxi waited downstairs. They got in. The driver asked where to. Elena gave the address of the hotel. The engine started. The car moved forward. There was no turning back now. The story was moving toward its climax, and every heartbeat brought them closer to the moment when the passed with small fingers. The interior of the cab was modest, worn leather and the faint scent of air freshener, a stark contrast to the destination awaiting them. As the car moved through the streets, Elena felt the weight of the past 4 years pressing against her chest, not as a burden, but as a testament to how far they had come. Mommy, Mia whispered, looking up with wide, dark eyes that mirrored Alexander's so perfectly it sometimes took Elena's breath away. Are we rich now? Elena smiled, a gentle, sad expression. She smoothed Mia's hair. No, sweetheart. We are not rich. But we are okay. We have enough. Because we have each other, Leo added, turning from the window. He was the more serious of the two, thoughtful beyond his years. You said money doesn't make people happy. I did say that, Elena replied, her voice steady. But sometimes money makes things easier. Today, we are going to a place where people have a lot of money. I want you to remember that being kind is more important than being rich. She looked out the window as the skyline changed. The modest buildings of their neighborhood gave way to the towering structures of the financial district. She recognized the buildings. She remembered when she lived in one of them. She remembered the silence of the penthouse, the coldness of the marble, the way love had been suffocated by expectation. Here, in this taxi, with the heating slightly broken and the seatbelt digging into her shoulder, she felt warmer than she ever had in that penthouse. But the journey to this warmth had not been easy. Her mind drifted back to the first year. The memory was sharp, like a cut that had healed but left a scar. She remembered the night Leo had gotten sick. It was during a storm, much like the one the night she left Alexander. He had burned with fever, spiking high in the middle of the night. She had been alone. Sarah was out of town. She had no car. She had wrapped him in blankets and carried him 3 blocks to the urgent care clinic in the rain. Mia had been only months old then, strapped to her chest in a carrier, crying because she was wet and cold. Elena remembered sitting in the waiting room, shivering, holding both children while the nurse called her name. She remembered the bill that came later, the one she couldn't pay immediately. She remembered crying in the bathroom of their small apartment, counting coins in a jar to buy formula, wondering if she had made a mistake. Wondering if Alexander was right. Was she selfish for keeping them? Was she condemning them to a life of struggle, when she could have given them everything by just swallowing her pride and going back? But then she remembered Leo's smile when he recovered. She remembered Mia's first step, taken on the worn carpet of their living room, with no one to witness it but Sarah and the walls. She had built this. She had carried the weight of 2 lives on her shoulders when she could barely stand on her own. She had worked double shifts at the library. She had sold the few jewelry pieces she had kept. She had learned to fix a leaky faucet, to budget every dollar, to be both mother and father. The exhaustion had been physical, a deep bone weariness that sleep couldn't fix. But the pride was hers alone. No one could take that away. Mommy Leo's voice pulled her back to the present. You look sad. Elena blinked, realizing a tear had escaped. She wiped it away quickly. I'm not sad, Leo. I'm just thinking about how much you've grown. You were so small once. I was so afraid I couldn't take care of you. But you did, Mia said confidently, squeezing her hand. You're the best mommy. The compliment struck Elena harder than any insult ever had. She squeezed Mia's hand back. Thank you, baby. I tried my best. The taxi began to slow. They were approaching the hotel. The valet stand was illuminated by golden lights. A red carpet rolled out despite the dry pavement. Cars glided up to the entrance, luxury sedans and limousines, doors opening to reveal gowns and tuxedos. Elena felt a spike of anxiety. This was Alexander's world. The world of cameras, of judgments, of whispers. She had hidden from it for 4 years. Now she was driving straight into the heart of it. "Okay," Elena said, her voice shifting into a tone of command. "When we get out, stay close to me. Hold my hand. Don't let go unless I tell you to." "Do you understand?" "Yes, Mommy," they chorused. The car stopped. The driver opened the door. The air outside was cool, scented with exhaust and perfume. Elena stepped out, adjusting her dress. She helped the children down. They stood on the sidewalk, 3 figures against the backdrop of the Grand Hotel. People were entering the lobby, laughing, clinking glasses. Some glanced at them. A woman in a fur stole looked at Elena's simple dress, then at the children, her eyes lingering with curiosity. Elena didn't flinch. She had worn cheap clothes before. She had been judged before. She was not the same woman who had shrunk under her mother-in-law's gaze. She took a deep breath. She thought about the nights she had sat at the kitchen table, balancing checkbooks, worrying about rent. She thought about the times she had skipped meals so the children could have fresh fruit. She thought about the loneliness, the quiet evenings when the only sound was the television. She had survived all of it. She had survived the heartbreak of leaving the man she loved. She had survived the fear of raising twins alone. This gala was just another challenge. Another bill to pay, another storm to weather. "Ready?" she asked the children. "Ready," Leo said. Elena led them toward the entrance. The doorman nodded to her, assuming she was a guest. She walked past him, her head high. Inside, the lobby was a cavern of crystal and gold. A band played softly in the corner. Waiters circulated with trays of champagne. The noise was a dull roar of wealth and power. Elena felt out of place, yet entirely grounded. She wasn't here for the money. She wasn't here for the status. She was here for the truth. She stopped near the entrance to the ballroom. She could see inside. The room was vast, filled with round tables draped in white linen. At the front, a stage was set up with a podium bearing the Sterling Industries logo. Her heart hammered against her ribs. That logo. She had seen it on letterhead, on buildings, on the side of Alexander's car. Now it was the backdrop for the moment everything would change. "Mommy, who are we looking for?" Mia asked, tugging her hand. Elena looked down at her. "Remember I told you about your father?" The children nodded. They knew the story, simplified but honest. They knew he was a man who worked far away. They knew he didn't know them yet. "He is in there," Elena said, pointing toward the ballroom. "When we go in, things might change. But no matter what happens, I love you. And you love each other. That doesn't change." Leo looked at the ballroom doors. "Is he nice?" Elena paused. How could she answer he was kind to her once? He was broken by his family. He was complicated. "He is lost," she said finally. "Maybe we can help him find his way." She saw a group of people entering the ballroom. Businessmen. She recognized one of them. It was Marcus, Alexander's assistant. He was laughing with a colleague. He hadn't seen her yet. This was it. The point of no return. If she walked in now, there was no hiding. The secret would be out. The diagnosis would be proven wrong. Alexander's world would tilt on its axis. Elena felt a surge of protectiveness. These children were not pawns. They were not tools to fix a legacy. They were people. She had to ensure that Alexander understood that. She had to ensure that he didn't try to buy them, or control them, or take them away. She had fought too hard to lose them now. "Take a deep breath," she whispered to herself. She stepped forward. The doorman at the ballroom entrance checked her invitation. She handed it over. He scanned it, nodded, and opened the heavy double doors. The sound of the party washed over them. Laughter, music, the clinking of silverware. The air was warm, scented with flowers. Elena walked in, her children beside her. She kept her eyes forward. She didn't look at the tables. She didn't look at the crowd. She looked at the stage. She saw him before he saw her. Alexander stood near the side of the stage, talking to a man in a suit. He looked older. His hair was slightly grayer at the temples. His face was harder, more lined. He looked tired. He held a glass of water, not champagne. He wasn't smiling. He looked like a man carrying the world, just as he had 4 years ago. But now there was no Elena to soften the blow. He was alone in the crowd. Elena stopped 10 feet from the entrance. She waited. She needed him to see them. She needed the moment to be clear. She felt Leo's hand tighten in hers. He sensed her tension. "Mommy," he whispered. "Wait," she said softly. She scanned the room. A few people noticed them. A woman nearby stopped talking, her eyes widening as she looked at the children. She looked from Leo to Mia, then toward the stage where Alexander stood. The resemblance was striking. It was undeniable. The woman nudged her partner. Whispers began to ripple outward, like a stone dropped in a pond. Alexander was still talking. He hadn't heard the whispers yet. He was focused on the man in front of him. Elena felt a strange calm settle over her. The fear was gone. The anxiety was gone. There was only the truth. She had raised these children through storms, through poverty, through loneliness. She had protected them from a lie. Now she was bringing them to the light. She took one step forward, then another. The floor beneath her felt solid. She was not the wife who had been cast aside. She was the mother who had built a family from nothing. And she was ready. "Alexander," she said, though her voice was too soft to be heard over the music. But she knew he would hear her soon. She knew he would look up. She knew that when he did, nothing would ever be the same. The past 4 years of silence were about to end. The challenges of single motherhood had prepared her for this war. But this was not a war. It was a reconciliation. Or it was a final goodbye. She didn't know which yet. But she knew she could survive either. She had survived everything else. She stood still, waiting for his eyes to find hers. The room seemed to slow down. The music faded. The voices dimmed. There was only him and her, and the 2 children who bound them together forever. The suspense hung in the air. Thick felt the change before he saw the cause. It was an instinct honed by years of navigating hostile boardrooms, a sense when the atmosphere shifted from favorable to dangerous. He stopped mid-sentence, the words dying on his lips. The man he had been speaking to frowned, noticing Alexander's distraction, and followed his gaze. Alexander turned slowly, the movement feeling heavy, as if the air around him had turned to water. His eyes swept across the room, past the crystal chandeliers, past the tables draped in white, until they landed on the entrance. And there she was, Elena. Time had not diminished her, it had refined her. She stood with a posture he didn't recognize, a spine of steel wrapped in elegance. She was not the woman who had left him in tears 4 years ago. She was a queen entering her court. But it was not Elena who stopped his heart. It was the 2 small figures clinging to her hands. The world narrowed down to a single point of focus. The noise of the gala faded into a dull hum, like the sound of the ocean heard from inside a shell. Alexander took a step forward, then another, his legs moving without his conscious command. He dropped the glass of water he was holding. It hit the carpet with a soft thud, spilling clear liquid onto the fibers, but he didn't look down. He couldn't look away from the children. The boy stood on Elena's right. He had dark hair, slightly tousled, falling over a forehead that was identical to Alexander's own. The shape of his jaw, even at 4 years old, was the same sharp line that Alexander saw in the mirror every morning. The boy's eyes were wide, scanning the room with a curiosity that was unmistakably sterling. It was the same look Alexander had when he was assessing a new venture, calculating, observant. The girl on Elena's left was a mirror image of her brother, but with a softness around the eyes that reminded Alexander of Elena. Yet, the intensity of her gaze, the way she tilted her head when she looked at something unfamiliar, was him. It was undeniable. It was biological fact staring him in the face, shattering the medical verdict that had ruled his life for 4 years. He walked through the crowd. People stepped aside, sensing the gravity of the moment. Some whispered behind hands, their eyes darting between the children and the Tycoon. The resemblance was not just a similarity, it was a replication. It was as if time had folded back on itself and given him a second chance, a chance he thought had been buried in a doctor's office years ago. Alexander felt a physical pain in his chest, a tightness that made it hard to breathe. It was a mixture of overwhelming joy and devastating grief. Joy for the existence of these children. Grief for the 4 years of birthdays, first steps, and bedtime stories he had missed. For years of silence that could have been filled with laughter. He stopped 3 feet away from them. Close enough to see the freckles on the boy's nose. Close enough to see the way the girl twisted a strand of hair around her finger, a nervous habit Alexander knew he himself possessed. He felt dizzy. He needed to speak, but his throat was dry. He looked at Elena. Her eyes were steady, holding his gaze without flinching. There was no victory in her look, no triumph. There was only a quiet strength, a protection that radiated from her like heat. She was not here to destroy him. She was here to show him the truth. Alexander, Elena said. Her voice was clear, cutting through the remaining whispers of the crowd. Elena, he managed to say. His voice was rough, barely a whisper. He looked down at the children. They were looking up at him, not with fear, but with a cautious interest. They had been prepared for this. They knew who he was. Who are these children? Elena didn't answer immediately. She squeezed the children's hands gently. This is Leo, she said, nodding to the boy. And this is Mia. Alexander knelt. He needed to be at their level. The movement was stiff, his joints protesting the sudden drop, but he didn't care. He rested his hands on his knees, looking into the faces of his son and daughter. Up close, the resemblance was even more striking. He could see the shape of his own mother in the girl's smile. He could see his father's stubborn set of the jaw in the boy. They were living proof that the diagnosis had been wrong. They were living proof that he had made a mistake that had cost him 4 years of their lives. Hello, Alexander said, his voice trembling slightly. My name is Alexander. Leo tilted his head. Mommy says you are our father. The word hit Alexander like a physical blow. Father. He had resigned himself to never hearing that word. He had accepted a legacy that would end with him. He had built an empire with no one to leave it to. And now here they were. Flesh and blood. Real. Yes, Alexander whispered, a tear escaping and tracing a path down his cheek. He didn't wipe it away. I am your father. Mia stepped forward, breaking away from Elena's hand slightly. She reached out and touched the lapel of his suit. Her fingers were small, warm. You look like the